8 seasons, 96 episodes, one forensic analyst working inside a police department, dismembering bodies on a boat while his colleagues sat 10 feet away eating lunch. Dexter Morgan was not just careful, he was calculated. He knew how evidence worked because he processed it every single day. He knew how investigators thought because he sat next to them at every briefing. He built a system around his kills that kept him invisible for years inside the very department that should have caught him first. But here is the question nobody actually stops to ask. Was Dexter smarter than the FBI specifically? Or was he just smarter than the people immediately around him? Those are two completely different things. Miami Metro was a local department with personal loyalty, limited resources, and blind spots that Dexter exploited constantly. The FBI is a different machine. Decades of catching killers exactly like him. Technology that finds evidence the human eye cannot see. Behavioral units built to see through the exact mask Dexter wore every single day. Let us find out which one it actually was. Dexter's daily work as a blood spatter analyst gave him genuine forensic knowledge that he used to consistently stay ahead of any investigation into his kills. Dexter processed crime scenes for Miami Metro PD. He understood how blood transferred between surfaces, what investigators prioritized when they entered a scene, and exactly which details triggered deeper scrutiny. When he built his kill room, he covered every surface in plastic sheeting before moving a victim in. He wore full protective clothing and kept his own DNA completely off every scene he created. When it came to disposal, he took bodies out on his boat, the slice of life, cut them into sections, packed them into weighted bags, and dropped them into the Gulf Stream, which moves water away from Florida at between 4 and 5 knots, making recovery near impossible without knowing the exact drop location. In Season 2, when FBI Special Agent Frank Lundy led the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force, he explicitly noted that the disposal method and absence of forensic evidence pointed to someone with professional forensic access. Lundy was the most experienced serial killer investigator in the show, and he even acknowledged that whoever was doing this understood evidence collection at a professional level. Dexter's knowledge base was real. He was not guessing what investigators looked for. He knew exactly what they looked for because he was one of them. His kill room protocol, his disposal method, and his ability to process scenes he had created without showing any behavioral change. All of that came from actual forensic training, not just raw intelligence. The FBI laboratory operates at a level that goes far beyond what Dexter's knowledge of local crime scene work could have accounted for. The FBI laboratory was established in 1932 and includes the DNA Analysis Unit, the Trace Evidence Unit, the Latin Print Operations Unit, and the Digital Evidence Laboratory. Luminol detects blood even after a surface has been thoroughly scrubbed clean by reacting with iron and hemoglobin. Alternate light sources reveal biological material completely invisible under normal conditions. The FBI's DNA extraction methods work from a single hair root or skin cell left on a surface that looks spotless to the human eye. On ocean disposal, law enforcement agencies operating in Florida waters have recovered human remains from the Gulf Stream corridor in real cases, and forensic pathologists have extracted identifying information from significantly degraded material. The Gulf Stream deposits debris along the Florida coast and the Bahamas depending on point of entry, and FBI coordination with the US Coast Guard includes current modeling to predict likely recovery zone. Beyond that, the slice of life was registered in Dexter's name. A sustained FBI financial investigation would show consistent nighttime maritime activity aligned precisely with when specific individuals disappeared from Miami, and running those travel records through VICAP's timeline tools would flag that correlation immediately. Dexter understood forensic investigation at the level it was practiced at Miami Metro. The FBI laboratory operates significantly above that level. He was ahead of the tools being used against him, but not ahead of the tools that were never deployed on him. That distinction matters enormously. So Dexter's forensic knowledge was a genuine advantage against Miami Metro. Against the FBI laboratory's full toolkit, that same knowledge would have shown him exactly how exposed he actually was. The forensic section only covers what Dexter knew about evidence. It does not cover whether the FBI could have read him before he ever made a single mistake. That is where things get genuinely uncomfortable. Before you see what the FBI's behavioral unit would have done with Dexter, make sure you subscribe, because the section coming up changes how you see the entire show. Dexter maintained a social mask sophisticated enough to pass daily scrutiny from trained law enforcement professionals for years without raising serious suspicion. Dexter worked inside Miami Metro for years without a single colleague formally identifying him as a person of interest based on behavior alone. He performed normal emotional responses in social situations, maintained a relationship with Rita Bennett, raised her children, and presented consistently as the reliable, slightly awkward but trustworthy lab guy. James Dokes suspected him and said openly that something was wrong, but his concerns were dismissed as personal animosity. Even when Dokes followed Dexter and raised alarms, Miami Metro treated Dokes as the problem rather than the warning. Dexter had also internalized his father Harry's code, which gave him a structured set of behavioral rules he followed consistently. He managed emotional expression, controlled physical distance from colleagues in ways that read as introversion, and maintained a surface life, the boat, the apartment, the relationship, that gave investigators nothing to anchor suspicion to. The mask worked on Miami Metro because the people around him were not trained to identify behavioral patterns associated with organized, mission-oriented killers. They knew Dexter personally, and personal familiarity is one of the strongest things that stops people from seeing red flags in someone they interact with every day. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit was built specifically to identify the behavioral patterns of people like Dexter from evidence they leave behind, and their methodology would have produced a description that matched him directly. The BAU was developed from research conducted in the 1970s by agents including Robert Ressler and John Douglas, who interviewed 36 convicted serial killers, including Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and Charles Manson, to build behavioral framework the unit still uses today. That research produced the organized versus disorganized killer distinction foundational to FBI profiling. An organized killer plans methodically, controls the crime scene, targets specific victim types, and shows forensic awareness. Dexter matched every single characteristic of an organized killer with law enforcement knowledge, a profile the BAU had documented across real cases extensively. The BAU's profile for the Bay Harbor Butcher, based purely on scene evidence, would have included male, forensic knowledge consistent with professional law enforcement or laboratory, local knowledge of Miami waterways, access to marine transport, victim selection indicating personal moral criteria rather than random targeting. That profile does not eliminate Miami Metro staffs as subjects. It narrows directly towards them. The BAU would have not identified Dexter from a gut feeling. They would have identified him from a behavioral profile built from his scenes, cross-referenced against a small pool of people with access and knowledge to produce them. That pool was not large, and Dexter was in it. Dexter's mask worked on people who knew him personally. The BAU works from behavioral evidence, not personal impression. The profile the Bay Harbor Butcher scenes would have generated pointed directly at someone with Dexter's professional background. The behavioral profile is one thread, but the most direct thread was the physical evidence Dexter left across 8 seasons that Miami Metro kept investigating in isolation. The FBI does not investigate in isolation. Over 8 seasons, Dexter left behind a significant trail of physical and circumstantial evidence that Miami Metro consistently failed to connect into a picture of one suspect. The Bay Harbor Butcher victims recovered from the ocean numbered 37 by the time the Season 2 investigation peaked. Dexter had forensic access to evidence in multiple open cases where suspects subsequently disappeared. In Season 6, he left a bloodslide at Travis Marshall's crime scene that LaGuerta recovered and connected to the Bay Harbor Butcher pattern. He appeared in a photograph from the wedding reception where Santos Barnes disappeared. He was identified as Kyle Butler by Arthur Mitchell's family after Mitchell disappeared. He had registered boat activity logs covering the period of Bay Harbor Butcher disposal events. Any single one of these facts is explainable. Together, across 8 seasons, they form a pattern that requires active effort to not see. Miami Metro investigated each of these facts in isolation when they came up at all. LaGuerta was the only person who ever attempted to aggregate them into a timeline, and her investigation was shut down by institutional resistance, evidence tampering, and ultimately her own murder. The department wanted to believe their colleague was not a killer, and that desire shaped what they chose to pursue. FBI chain of custody protocols, CODIS, and VICAP would have prevented the evidence fragmentation that allowed Dexter to survive as long as he did. VICAP, established by the FBI in 1985, maintains detailed records of violent crimes across the United States, comparing cases automatically for matching patterns in method, victim type, geographic location, and timing. CODIS maintains DNA profiles from crime scenes and convicted offenders nationwide. If Dexter left any biological trace, CODIS would have flagged unknown DNA appearing across multiple connected scenes. FBI evidence facilities use layered access controls and audit trails, meaning evidence logged into a federal system cannot be removed by a single person without generating a permanent alert. The blood slide LaGuerta found would have stayed in that system regardless of what happened to her personally. The BTK case demonstrated this directly. Dennis Rader killed 10 people between 1974 and 1991 and was not caught until 2005. When FBI cyber specialists traced metadata on a floppy disk he sent to law enforcement back to a church computer registered in his name, that single digital trace closed the case open for 30 years. Dexter's survival across 8 seasons depended entirely on Miami Metro's evidence fragmentation, the failures to connect data points across investigations into a profile of one suspect. FBI systems prevent exactly that fragmentation by design. The individual pieces Miami Metro kept losing or investigating separately would have sat in federal systems, available to every agent on the case, building a picture that pointed in one direction. Dexter left enough evidence to build a case against him multiple times over. The reason that case never got built was fragmentation and institutional resistance inside a single local department. The FBI systems eliminate both of those factors. The evidence question and behavioral profile are both devastating on their own, but there is one more layer underneath all of this that answers the original question most directly. But what do you think? Could Dexter have survived even one season if the FBI had been running the investigation from the start? Drop your answers in the comments below. Dexter demonstrated real intelligence across the series, not just forensic knowledge, but rapid situational adaptation, long-term planning, and the ability to manage complex threats under pressure. When the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation pulled close in Season 2, Dexter did not panic. He assessed the threats systematically, identified Dokes as the most immediate danger, and began engineering a situation where Dokes would become the primary suspect, while maintaining his full work responsibilities and personal relationships without any visible behavioral change. When LaGuerta closed in during Season 7, Dexter ran a counter-investigation alongside her, staying consistently one move ahead. When Quinn hired Stan Liddy to surveil him, Dexter identified the surveillance, located Liddy, and neutralized the threat before any usable evidence reached Quinn. These were not lucky escapes. They required fast threat assessment, strategic planning across multiple variables, and precise execution under serious pressure. What Dexter demonstrated was strong applied intelligence, the ability to take information, assess its implications quickly, and respond in ways that protected him. He outthought trained investigators repeatedly and over a sustained period. That is real, and it is not nothing. The type of intelligence Dexter demonstrated, reactive, individual, dependent on having time to assess and respond, is specifically what FBI coordination and surveillance protocol are designed to eliminate before the suspect even knows that they're being watched. FBI's surveillance operations on high-priority subjects do not announce themselves. Physical surveillance teams can follow a subject across the city without detection. Electronic surveillance authorized under federal warrants covers phone communication, financial records, and digital activity simultaneously. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, evaded the FBI for 17 years using careful operational security and methodical planning that showed genuine intelligence. He was identified in 1996 after his brother recognized his writing in his published manifesto and contacted the FBI. One identification led to a warrant, a search of his Montana cabin, and enough physical evidence to close the case permanently. Individual intelligence, no matter how high, does not survive coordinated institutional pressure indefinitely. Every subject eventually makes a contact or leaves a trace, and FBI coordination ensures the system is already positioned to act on it the moment that happened. Dexter's intelligence was reactive. He responded to threats after they emerged and managed them through quick thinking and insider access. That worked against Miami Metro because the investigation was slow, fragmented, and penetrable. Against an FBI team with coordinated surveillance and federal warrants, the reactive model collapses. The first time he knew the FBI was watching him would have been the last time he had any freedom to respond. Dexter was genuinely intelligent, but the question was never, was he smarter than any individual FBI agent? The question was whether he was smarter than a coordinated federal investigation built over decades specifically to catch people like him. Those are two completely different questions with two very different answers. Dexter Morgan survived 8 seasons because he was intelligent, had insider access, and was being hunted by a department that investigated incidents in isolation and did not want to believe their colleague was a killer. Every single escape across the entire series depended on one or more of those 3 factors. The blood slide LaGuerta found would have entered FBI chain of custody systems no single person could tamper with. The BAU's behavioral profile from the Bay Harbor butcher scenes pointed directly at someone with Dexter's professional background. The evidence trail across 8 seasons would have sat in VICAP available to dozens of agents simultaneously. And if all of that failed, coordinated FBI surveillance would have removed his ability to react before he even knew that he was being watched. He was smarter than the people around him. He was not smarter than the system. And the FBI is the system. Against Miami Metro, Dexter had a fighting chance. He used brilliantly. Against a full FBI investigation, the game would have ended long before he realized it had started. If this breakdown changed how you see Dexter, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, and go watch our video on how long Dexter would survive in The Boys Season 5.